Take a look at your kitchen table. Go on, I'll wait. Somewhere on it, or maybe in a nearby cabinet, next to its lifelong, profoundly more popular partner, salt, sits one of these, a pepper shaker. Or maybe a pepper grinder if you're fancy. It's an object of such profound insignificance that its absence is more noticeable than its presence. It's the background actor of your spice rack, a culinary afterthought. You could buy a lifetime supply for what you spent on coffee this morning. It costs, depending on the brand, about 3 cents a teaspoon. 3 cents. Now look at this. I want you to picture a treasure chest, overflowing with gold. Picture a king's ransom. Picture the kind of wealth that could buy armies, build empires, and change the course of history. Got it? Good. Now for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to prove to you that those two things, your cheap, dusty pepper shaker, and that chest of unimaginable treasure are in fact the exact same thing. You think I'm kidding? For nearly 2,000 years that humble black peppercorn was the most valuable, most sought after, and most violent substance on planet Earth. It drew and redrew the map of the known world. It was the engine of the global economy, the secret ingredient in the recipe for empire. The quest to control its supply chain was the most absurdly fascinating, blood-soaked and consequential shenanigan in human history. Welcome to Critical Path, where we explore stories and innovations about our global supply chain that connect our world to your everyday life. Today's episode focuses on how the earliest supply chain influenced our modern-day economy. So the big question, why? What was so special about these little dried-up berries from a climbing vine in southern India? Why did the most powerful civilization in the world, the Roman Empire, become utterly, hopelessly obsessed with them? The answer isn't just, it made things taste good, though that was a big part of it. You have to remember, before refrigeration, the average person's diet was a monotonous, soul-crushing parade of salted, cured, or borderline rancid meat. Salt was a preservative, but it made everything taste well, salty. Pepper was different. It was an explosion of flavor. It didn't just mask the taste of decay, it transformed it. It was culinary magic. But its value went far beyond the dinner table. Roman physicians who based their medicine on the theory of the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, believed the body needed to be in balance. Pepper was seen as a hot and dry substance, the perfect antidote to cold and wet ailments like, you guessed it, the common cold. Got a cough? Pepper. Stomachache? Pepper. Feeling a bit down? You probably just need more pepper. It was the original essential oil. So you have a miracle drug and a flavor enhancer all in one. But the real reason for its absurd price tag was its most potent quality. It was a status symbol. Having pepper on your table in ancient Rome was the equivalent of leaving the keys to a new Lamborghini casually lying on your counter. It screamed, I am so wealthy, I can afford to eat something that has traveled over 5,000 miles, across treacherous seas and vast deserts, through the hands of countless merchants, bandits and tax collectors, just to spice up my roast dormouse. It was conspicuous consumption in its purest form, and the Romans consumed it with an insatiable hunger. Apicius, the famous Roman gourmand, put it in nearly everything, from flamingo to lentils. They even put it in wine. The demand was so high that it created one of the world's first truly global, long-distance supply chains. The journey of a single peppercorn was an epic in itself. It started on the Malabar coast of India, was carried by ship across the Indian Ocean to ports in the Red Sea, hauled by camel caravans across the Egyptian desert to the Nile, shipped downriver to Alexandria, and then, finally, loaded onto vessels for the last leg across the Mediterranean to Rome. Each step was perilous. Each middleman took a cut. And the Roman government slapped a hefty import tax on it when it arrived. The historian Pliny the Elder complained bitterly that India was draining the Roman treasury of over 50 million sesterces a year. He called pepper's popularity surprising, given its bitterness, and bemoaned the great lengths they went to for a simple spice. But the Romans didn't care. They were hooked. When Alaric the Visigoth sacked Rome in 410 AD, he didn't just demand gold and silver as ransom to leave the city. His list of demands was very specific. It included thousands of pounds of silk, and a staggering 3,000 pounds of black pepper. That's right. To save their civilization, the Romans had to pay a barbarian with a condiment. The age of antiquity was ending, but the age of pepper was just getting started. Price check. Rome 70 AD, $2,450 per pound. After the fall of Rome, Europe entered the Dark Ages. Long-distance trade routes collapsed, and for centuries, pepper became a distant, almost mythical memory for most of the continent. But one city kept the flame alive. One city remembered the fortunes that could be made by controlling the flow of goods from east to west. That city was Venice. Let's be clear about something. The Republic of Venice was, without a doubt, the most brilliant and ruthless group of supply chain managers in history. Positioned perfectly on the Adriatic, they were the gateway between Europe and the riches of the East, and by the 12th century, they had maneuvered themselves into a position of absolute, total, soul-crushing monopoly over the European spice trade. They didn't grow the pepper, they didn't even go get it themselves, they were far too clever for that. Instead, they cut an exclusive deal with the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt. All the pepper and spices from India and beyond would flow into the port of Alexandria, and only Venetian ships would be allowed to buy it. They controlled the choke point. Imagine if today, one single company owned every port, every cargo ship, and every delivery truck that brought goods from Asia to the West. That was Venice. They were the port authorities, the shipping line, and the distributor all rolled into one. And they behaved exactly as you'd expect a monopoly to behave. They became the ultimate scalpers. They would buy a pound of pepper in Alexandria for a ducat and sell it in the markets of Europe for 40, a markup of 4,000%. It was the most profitable business in the world, and it made Venice fabulously wealthy. The stunning basilicas, the grand canals, the art of Titian and Tintoretto, it was all built on a foundation of pepper. For the rest of Europe, this was maddening. If you were a king in England or a prince in Germany, and you wanted to buy pepper to show off at your feasts, you had no choice. You had to pay the Venetian price. Every sprinkle of spice on their food was a coin in a Venetian merchant's pocket. This Venetian stranglehold lasted for over 300 years. They were the undisputed kings of logistics. But their success bred a continent-wide feeling of deep, burning resentment. And that resentment would eventually boil over into a desperate, almost insane question. Is there another way? Price check. Venice 1450 AD, $4,100 per pound. This brings us to the age of discovery. Or as we like to call it here at Critical Path, the age of the desperate workaround. Because let's be honest, the story you learned in school is a little too clean. It's a story of brave explorers in search of knowledge, glory, and God. And while those things were on the list, the main driver, the real, tangible motivation for nearly every one of those perilous voyages, was the burning desire to find a new supply route for spices and cut out the Venetian middlemen. It was the most extreme, and ultimately violent, act of comparison shopping in history. The first to get serious were the Portuguese. Led by their visionary prince Henry the Navigator, they began a slow, methodical, 80-year crawl down the coast of Africa. For generations, Portuguese sailors pushed the boundaries of the known world, battling storms, disease, and the sheer terror of the unknown, all in the hope that Africa had a bottom, and that on the other side lay a direct sea route to the Spice Islands of India. Most of them died, but in 1497, a tough, determined nobleman named Vasco da Gama finally rounded the Cape of Good Hope. He had done it. He was in the Indian Ocean. No Venetians, no Egyptian sultans, no desert caravans. Just open water between him and the source of all that wealth. When he finally reached the port of Calicut in India, the legendary home of pepper, it should have been a moment of triumph. But instead, he was met with a classic supply chain problem. He had nothing the locals wanted to trade. He'd brought wool cloth, iron pots, and cheap trinkets, the kinds of things that were useful back in Europe. The fabulously wealthy merchants of Calicut just laughed at him. They had silks, porcelain, and jewels. They wanted gold and silver, which da Gama had very little of. The trip was a diplomatic disaster, involving cannon fire and hostage-taking. But da Gama managed to secure a small cargo of pepper and other spices. The journey home was even more brutal than the one out. Scurvy ravaged his crew. More than half of his men died. But when his two surviving ships limped back into Lisbon in 1499, the cargo they carried was so valuable that it paid for the entire expedition 60 times over. 60 times. Portugal had found the ultimate workaround. The Venetian monopoly was broken, and the world would never be the same. But wait, you might be saying, what about that other guy, the one who sailed the ocean blue in 1492? Ah yes, Christopher Columbus. While the Portuguese were meticulously charting their course around Africa, this ambitious Italian mariner had a different, crazier idea. He was the quintessential startup founder, with a disruptive pitch. He went to the venture capitalists of his day, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, and said, "Listen, everyone is trying to go east to get to the east. It's a long, crowded market. I say we go west. The world is round, right? we'll pop out on the other side, right in Japan and India. We'll get all the pepper we can carry, and we'll beat the Portuguese to it. It was a bold, and as we now know, a spectacularly wrong idea. He had fundamentally miscalculated the size of the earth. But the Spanish, desperate to get in on the spice game, funded his expedition. So Columbus sailed west, full of dreams of pepper and gold, and he ran, smack, into a continent that nobody in Europe knew was there. He spent the rest of his life convinced he had found the outskirts of Asia, desperately searching for the great spice ports he'd read about. He never found them. He found chili peppers, which are a completely different plant, but he tried to pass them off as the real thing. It didn't work. From a purely supply chain perspective, Christopher Columbus's famous voyage was a glorious, world-altering, continent-discovering failure. He was the guy who used the world's worst GPS, got completely lost, and ended up in the wrong neighborhood, all while looking for a grocery store. So the Portuguese had their sea route, the Spanish had a new continent, and the Venetian monopoly was toast. You'd think this would be the happy ending to the story. Pepper for everyone. Oh, you sweet summer child, this is where the story gets even messier. Because finding a new route is one thing, controlling it is another. The Portuguese were followed by the Dutch, who were more organized, better funded, and infinitely more ruthless. The Dutch East India Company, or the VOC, was a revolutionary creation. It wasn't just a company, it was a state within a state. It had the power to mint its own money, negotiate treaties, and, most importantly, wage war. It was the world's first multinational corporation, and it had its own army and navy, all dedicated to one goal: achieving a total and absolute monopoly over the spice trade, no matter the human cost. They violently kicked the Portuguese out of the key spice islands. In places like the Banda Islands, the source of nutmeg and mace, they systematically slaughtered or enslaved almost the entire local population to gain total control over production. Their methods were brutal, but for a time, they were wildly successful. But monopolies, in the long run, are fragile. The secret of the peppercorn vine couldn't be kept forever. Other colonial powers like the English and the French got in on the action. Peppercorn plants were smuggled out and cultivated in other parts of the world with similar climates: Indonesia, Malaysia, and eventually, places as far-flung as Brazil and Vietnam. As the supply of pepper increased, its mystique and its price began to plummet. The very thing that made it valuable, its scarcity, was gone. The bubble that had lasted for almost 2 millennia had finally, definitively, burst. Which brings us back to today, and that humble shaker on your table. The journey of a peppercorn in the 21st century is a miracle of quiet, boring efficiency. Today, the world's undisputed pepper king is Vietnam. A farmer there will harvest the berries, dry them in the sun until they turn black and wrinkly, and sell them to a local processor. There, the peppercorns are cleaned, sorted by machine, and graded for quality. They're packed into large sacks and loaded into the most important invention in the history of modern logistics, the standardized shipping container. That container is loaded onto a truck, driven to a port, and craned onto a massive container ship, a floating warehouse carrying thousands of identical boxes. That ship will sail across the Pacific, through the Panama Canal, and across the Atlantic to ports in Europe and America, with a level of safety and predictability that Vasco da Gama could only have dreamed of. At its destination port, the container is unloaded and put on a train or a truck, and sent to a food processing plant. There, the peppercorns are sterilized, ground, and packaged into those little glass shakers. A final truck ride takes them to a distribution center, and then to your local supermarket, where you buy it for a few dollars. The entire violent, chaotic, world-changing saga has been replaced by barcodes, spreadsheets, and intermodal transport. The shenanigans are gone, replaced by the silent, beautiful hum of a well-oiled global supply chain. The quest for pepper no longer redraws maps, it just generates shipping manifests. Price check: today $12 per pound. So the next time you sit down for a meal and unthinkingly reach for the pepper, take a second to look at it. Really look at it. Don't just see a condiment. See the wealth of the Roman Empire. See the glittering canals of Venice. See the desperation in the eyes of Columbus and the blood on the hands of da Gama. See the rise and fall of monopolies, the birth of corporations, and the dawn of a truly globalized world. See the thousands of years of history, and the millions of miles of ocean, and the countless human dramas that had to happen for that little black rock to end up, conveniently, right next to the salt. It's the end result of the greatest supply chain shenanigan of all time. And it's an absurdly fascinating story, isn't it? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to discover more fascinating stories that link our global community to your everyday life, please like and subscribe.